A true story that actually happened in Korea. A person who can see spirits. I heard a story from a senior of mine about a truly peculiar, older brother. This man was not what one would call a mudang, shaman. He wasn't the type to channel spirits for fortune-telling. He was known to be someone who trains his own body and chi energy to help people. That's how he was described. I was told that even the way he looks at people is fundamentally different. The explanation that man gave me still sticks in my mind. He said that humans aren't just made of a physical body. That there's a mind that thinks and judges, and separate from that, something like a soul, that overlaps and exists. And he said that some people can see these things as if they were looking through a window, or a piece of glass. Normal people look at things with their eyes, but he's looking at the other side of that window. Moreover, sometimes a different personality called the younger brother suddenly emerges, and apparently, he has a habit of stuttering on the first word he speaks whenever that happens. The story began in Japan. The older brother and my senior went on a trip to Japan, met up with some local friends, and went out for drinks. As the mood picked up, you know how it goes, the inevitable question comes up. Hey, do you know any scary stories around here? At that moment, one of their Japanese friends brought up a specific place. He said there was a house about a 30-minute drive away, where someone who used to perform curse proxies once lived, and that it's an abandoned house now. The owner of that house reportedly used dolls as a medium to cast curses, placing things like hair or fingernails inside them to torment someone. The rumors grew in the neighborhood, and for a while, people flocked to the place. Then, one rainy day, the house caught fire. But even with the rain, the fire wouldn't go out, and in the end, it remained as an infamous abandoned house. That was the story they added on. The problem was that the girls at the bar were pushy, insisting, "Let's go." The moment he heard that, it was as if his younger brother personality had jumped out. He started stuttering, repeating the same words. Don't go." My senior tried to stop them so as not to ruin the mood. But the girls, perhaps their pride wounded, became even more stubborn. And in the end, around 11 p.m., they all ended up going to that abandoned house. He said the abandoned house looked more like a home than they had expected. It wasn't a completely collapsed ruin, but the type that still bore traces of people having lived there and left. The smell of wet wood, the strange soot-like scent rising from the burnt walls, the damp air. The moment they opened the door and entered, he said it again. Don't listen. Especially the sound coming from the corner, the edge of the room. Even though everyone else pretended not to hear it, he kept repeating, "Don't look there, don't listen there." My senior felt a chill run down his spine at that point, but the Japanese friends just laughed it off, saying, "What's so scary about it?" There was a space deep inside the house that looked like a room for worshipping a deity. And when the curious group tried to enter it, he stopped them even more intensely. He told them not to enter. Absolutely not. In the end, everyone just took a quick look, went outside, and headed back to their accommodation. But from that moment on, his expression changed completely. Even after drinking more, he wouldn't smile. He kept an expression as if he were searching for something somewhere. Then, around 2 or 3 in the morning, he suddenly sat bolt upright and said, "It followed us." At that moment, the air in the room dropped instantly. The accommodation had a traditional Japanese layout, and a girl was sleeping in a tatami room behind a sliding door. The lights were off, and only the men were left in the living area drinking. He walked toward that room, but the moment he stepped over the threshold, he flinched and backed away. "It's here. It's gone." After saying that, he told my senior and the Japanese friend in a very low, but clear and firm voice, "Do not enter the tatami room, absolutely not." He went into the room alone, and the moment he saw the sleeping girl, he became even more frantic. "Her eyes are open, I have to close them." My senior didn't understand what he was talking about, but he moved like a man who had already reached a conclusion. And the next scene was truly chilling. As if signaling, "Be quiet," he held a finger to his lips and didn't move for 10 minutes. The girl had been holding her breath at first, but at a certain moment, tears began to fall drop by drop and her body started to tremble slightly. It wasn't that she was struggling to breathe or in pain. It was as if she were terrified, forcing herself to suppress a scream. And that state lasted for nearly 30 minutes. Then, he suddenly pulled his hand away and spoke to her, gently touching her shoulder. He stroked her back slowly, as if to calm her down. The moment she opened her eyes, her throat made a sharp hitching sound as if she were suppressing a gag. But nothing came out. Instead, her crying burst forth all at once, like a dam breaking. It wasn't so much that she had regained her senses, but rather that the pent-up terror was spilling out of her body. He kept calming her down, saying, "It's okay, it's okay." But he asked her without delay. What had she noticed? What kind of presence had been near her? At that moment, the words that came back through the interpreter made everyone freeze even more. The girl took the doll used for curses out of her bag. She said she had brought it from the abandoned house. She intended to use it on someone, but she wouldn't say who. The moment he heard that, he reached a conclusion. The only way is to burn it. However, he said not to burn it immediately, but to soak it in water and wait until morning. After that, they threw it outside, and burned it with fire once the day broke. After the girl calmed down, she was finally able to explain what really came that night. From the girl's perspective, it was like this. In the darkness, she heard the sound of someone lightly shaking a bell. Chime. Chime. At first, she thought it was a dream. But the sound became clearer, and strangely, the source of the sound was fixed in the corner of the room. And in that corner, a blurry mass began to slowly take shape. Like a person. It didn't come closer, instead, it moved as if it were dancing while swaying left and right. As if to announce, "I'm here," while shaking the bell. Chime, chime. The faster the dance, the closer the sound got. And at one moment, that shadow reached right up to her nose. Close enough to feel its breath. The face she saw there was the problem. The eyes, and the teeth. It looked like a human, but it felt unmistakably not human. It pressed up against her, as if trying to enter her mouth, thrusting itself at her. But as if blocked by something, it couldn't get any further. Instead, it kept dancing, and dancing, right in front of her eyes. At that moment, her body wouldn't move, only tears leaked out, and her vision was trembling. Just then, he whispered into her ear. In Japanese, enunciating clearly, Daijubu, mi, tojite. It's okay, close your eyes. As she kept her eyes closed and endured while hearing those words, that shape began to move its neck with a click-click motion. It seemed to stop for a moment, and then, as if it were a lie, it vanished. After that, someone shook her awake, and the girl finally ran outside, wailing. And that was when everyone else was forced to admit that something had truly been there. The next day, my senior asked him, "The sound of the bells. What was that?" He explained it like this. Bells are like a signal to call someone or to announce, "I am here." It's the same thing as waving your hand while calling someone's name. Then, he said something even more chilling. That dance is only visible to those who can see it. To those with a similar nature. In his assessment, that girl was on the susceptible to possession side. Meaning she had a tendency to attract things, and on top of that, she had touched a cursed doll, so a mark had definitely been placed on her. He also added this at the end. A thing that can form a proper shape and dance, something that can show itself, is not, to begin with, a weak entity. It's not just a drifting presence, but likely something with dense malice and strong power. That is why he had been so insistent about that tatami room. Don't listen. Don't enter. Pretend you don't hear it. That night, every one of those words, they all had a reason. Since that day, the older brother became quieter for a while. Even though he used to be the face that would smile at drinking parties, It felt as if he were wearing an extra layer of silence. That's how he appeared. That was the beginning of the story of the double window brother that I heard. He explained that he was different from what we typically call a mudang, who has received a spirit channeling. It wasn't that something had entered his body, but rather that he had trained himself since childhood, and was closer to someone who handles chi energy. He explained with a serious expression that humans have not just a physical body, but a soul from birth, and that the way one sees through that soul is completely different for everyone. The whole window he spoke of was like a window. Normal people see with their eyes, their brains interpret it, and that's the end of it. But he said he had a sensation that somewhere in between, there was a thin, glass-like window floating there. And being a double window brother meant having one extra window added to that. It sounds strange when put into words, but according to him, it felt literally like another window opening right before his eyes. In short, he was someone who, sometimes, saw things he didn't want to see. It would have been better if it had ended at that abandoned house in Japan, but the story did not end there. It continues to an event he experienced as a child in China, an event that feels just like the movie The Priests. He said he went to China when he was 7. He wasn't really attending school or anything, but spent his time following his grandfather as he traveled from place to place. It was around noon that day too. His grandfather was heading out for some business, and he followed behind him just like always. Motivated by the feeling that he didn't want to be home alone. He believed that as long as he followed his grandfather's back, he would be safe wherever they went. The house they arrived at was strangely quiet. On the outside, it was just an ordinary rural home. But the moment he stood before the entrance, the texture of the air felt different. It wasn't about a smell or anything like that. It was a feeling where, as you inhaled, the back of your throat became heavy. He said an indescribable abnormality was laid out from the very beginning, like the floor itself. The people in the house were visibly shaken, repeating only that, the child is strange. At first, they said they all thought, is it an illness? And had kept the child locked in a room. When he entered the room, the child looked as if they were sleeping quietly, but that stillness was so quiet that it was unsettling, if not outright ominous. Even if the breathing is faint, even if they don't toss and turn, the air in a room should shift at least a little bit if someone is sleeping in it, right? But that room was frozen solid, as if someone had pressed a pause button. What's more, his whole window was open at the time, which made it all the more uncomfortable. If he couldn't see it, it would have ended with just a feeling of, that's strange. But the moment he started to see it, there was nowhere left to run. The older brother didn't go into detail about how the handling of the situation proceeded. However, one thing was clear. What happened in that room that day was not some kind of human dispute. The people who entered the room were priests. According to how he described it, it was just like the methods you see in movies like The Priests. He said he didn't know exactly what religion it was, or what kind of ritual it was, but the air itself felt just like that. The priests began preparing something, and they put something like headphones on him. He said that from that moment on, the scene he was watching changed. The person's mouth opened. Deep inside, he saw something like hands. Truly, things that looked like hands. Many of them, layered on top of each other as if pushing one another, seemed to be sucked into the back of the throat. Even seeing that, he said he couldn't breathe. He couldn't even make a sound. He said that was the first time he realized that when a human being is truly terrified, they lose their voice. After that, whether the priests took off the headphones or checked something, the person's voice changed. At first, it sounded like a normal voice, but suddenly, it turned into something like a low, rough man's voice. And incomprehensible words mixed with harsh tones began to pour out. What made it even more chilling was that it was Chinese. From there, the priests moved as if following a strict procedure. They put something like water in a small vessel and sprinkled it around the room, spoonful by spoonful. During all of this, they were constantly chanting, and their prayer-like words never ceased. To his eyes, the person no longer looked like the person from before. They were just a black something. Each time the priests threw drops of water, That black mass would flinch, sway as if recoiling, and its shape would distort as if it had touched something searing hot. Looking with his eyes, it was clearly a human body, but when he looked through his hole window, he could see the other thing inside. Bit by bit, it was losing its form. What was strange was that it wasn't just happening inside. According to his story, the child was holding a doll in their mouth at the time. Yet, even the doll that had been left outside began to get wet in the exact same way. No one had poured water on it, but it was as if the water sprinkled inside the room had chased after the doll outside and soaked into it. This sent the people in the house into a further panic, and at that moment, he became certain. This is connected. So he shouted at the people outside, almost screaming at them, "Take that doll, don't say a word, and stay still. Until I come out, don't move no matter what happens." And then he ran. The child inside had started to wake up, and he had to stop the others from doing something rash out of fear before it was too late. Don't exert your chi, just stay still. Where do you think you are right now? Breathe. Breathe. You can't stay there. He said he kept talking to them like that from the side, constantly. Whether those words were all directed at the child, or at the thing borrowing the child's body, he said he wasn't sure. But he said there was one thing he realized. When you make it impossible to breathe, it feels as if it wants to emerge even more aggressively from within. That's why he was desperately trying to make the child breathe. In the end, the room fell silent. The priests came outside and their faces, they looked strangely serene. It wasn't the look of someone who had just finished a grueling task, but rather an expression like, "The job is done." That was when my grandfather went inside to check the house. He said it was the first time his grandfather had ever felt that kind of presence in his entire life. It wasn't the kind of awe that a believer feels toward God, but something that surpassed that. A colder, harder, and indescribable pressure. My grandfather began to examine the structure of the house right then and there. And the moment he saw it, his expression hardened. The house was built in the shape of a cross. Even though there were no crucifix decorations or religious items inside, the very shape of the house itself was like a cross. What was even more terrifying was that the direction of the sunrise and sunset was woven into it as well. It felt as if that cross were a structure designed to fix something in place, straddling the entirety of day and night. My grandfather grabbed a hammer on the spot, and he began to bash away at certain walls and threshold-like parts of the house. Like a madman. Opening what had been blocked, letting the outside air in, to let the dust and damp air inside escape. If it stagnates, it rots. Qi, too, must be allowed to flow out. He said that was what his grandfather had said. After that, one of the priests said quietly, "This is not a priest's job. This is the work of a demon. We have just now driven it away." Leaving only those words behind, the priests departed.